The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
The Nationals scored more runs last night than they had in their previous 5 games combined. They went long, but they also went short. And they're playing a brand of baseball when they score runs, and not necessarily like they did last night, but when they score enough to win. Kind of a throwback. Yeah, I know. It's the day of the 3-run homer that wins the games, but what the Nationals are doing when they're playing well, and they're still 4 games under 500. But if you haven't checked them out lately, fun to watch. Certainly fun to watch last night as they scored 12 runs to beat the Twins. We'll get to that and what Davey Martinez said about his team's win last night. Also, conference finals get going tonight in the NBA. You got Indiana playing at Boston, and then tomorrow night the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to be at home to open up the Western Conference Finals for the first time in 20 years. And they will be playing the Dallas Mavericks. And of the 4, looks like it's Boston's finals to win, right? Because the other teams are pretty much playing with house money, maybe not Dallas, but, of the other 3, I don't think they necessarily expected to be there, whereas Boston, this has got to be the year for them. And we'll talk about pressure and what they're facing and all that stuff a little bit later on. But, the Nationals last night, and I did watch a fair amount of the game, they did something that they have not done recently on top of scoring runs, is they outslugged the opponent. They had more big home runs than the Minnesota Twins did. They had 3 of them. They also got off to an early lead, which was helpful. But recognize this, how they've been playing. Now, they did get to a game over 500 for the first time in 3 years a couple of weeks ago. Then they slid back. They had to play the Phillies. Phillies are the best team in baseball. They got swept over the weekend. Minnesota Twins coming in for a 3-game series that wraps up tomorrow with an afternoon game. And as is written in the Post today, the 12-run eruption reversed a trend that saw the Nationals score 10 runs total over their previous 5 games. Washington, 21-25, entered Monday's game ranked 29th in slugging and 28th in home runs with only 37. So they're near the bottom in power numbers. Those numbers included just 8 homers in May, 5 from Eddie Rosario, Joey Meneses, and then they had 2 other home runs. But that is is not the formula for baseball these days. That's not how you do it, and that's why you have a guy like Joey Gallo, who's hitting 129 and playing under a $5 million contract. He hits enough home runs to earn his pay. Kyle Schwarber, leadoff guy for the Philadelphia Phillies, hits around 210, but when he's hitting 40, 45 bombs, that justifies the batting average. It's just the way things work these days. But also, which was helpful last night, was they did get off to a good start, and they were up 3-1 in the 4th inning before they kind of put it out of hand in the 5th and 6th. Here's Davey Martinez.
Things start to fall in place. They start to relax a little bit. The bats get better. We stay in the middle of the field. That's a big thing today. We hit some home runs, but for the most part, you look at all the hits, they were, in the middle of the field, which we talk about all the time. So, you get that, and then you get another good outing from Mitchell, and it becomes a good day.
Yeah, it was a good day as he got his 3rd win of the year, and this is more from Davey on the brand of baseball that they're playing, and the fact that they can win games in the way we just had Whitey Herzog pass away. Whitey ball. They played their games on artificial turf, so it was a little bit different, but they did it with speed. They did it with timely hitting. They did it with hits up the middle. And that's the way the Nationals do it when they win these days. They're not going to outslug anybody. They did last night, but that's unusual. And here's how Davey puts it.
Home runs are sexy, as I always say, right? But the at-bats in between those, guys get on base, guys knocking runs, Jacob Young, big hit, driving the ball up the middle. Rosario, settling down and hitting the ball hard a couple of times and running the bases the way we're supposed to run the bases. To me, that's a great day. So let's build off of that, come back tomorrow and do it again.
Yeah, and look, Mitchell Parker looks like he might stay. He's now 3-2 on the season. They brought him up because of Josiah Gray's injury. Josiah Gray has been out for more than a month, but he did throw a bullpen session yesterday. Who will throw live the next time out, which is, I guess they'll give him the usual 4 days rest before he does that. So he could be on his way back. And Cade Cavalli, who's coming off the Tommy John surgery, he threw 44 pitches in a simulated game yesterday, and he could be back in a month. So get some pitching back, get some timely hitting, maybe a few more home runs. I'm not saying that they're going to be a playoff team, but if you haven't checked out the Nationals lately, they've been a lot more fun to watch than they have for the past few years. All right, to the NBA and what we've got coming up tonight. We've got Game 1 with Indiana truly playing with house money against the Boston Celtics, who have been on the verge, it seems, of winning an NBA championship for a few years, but just haven't been able to get over the top. If they don't do it this year, then you got to label them as chokers. This is Kendrick Perkins yesterday on SportsCenter on the preview of Game 1 tonight in Boston.
It's going to come down to the Celtics, and are they going to be disciplined enough to get stops and get back in transition against this high-power pace of offense, right? And we're talking about a bunch of dogs when we're talking about the Indiana Pacers, a mixture of youth and old heads. And when it comes down to Tyrese Halliburton leading the charge, he does an excellent job of putting pressure on the defense, attacking downhill, making plays for others. You have Pascal Siakam, a guy that's a champion, who knows what this moment is all about and also know how to set the tone. TJ McConnell, he's coming in off the bench. He's providing a spark as well. And you see guys like Aaron Nesmith and Nembhard, they have found their roles, and Obi Toppin found their roles in being stars in their roles. Look, if the Celtics do not strap up their shoes for this series, they're going to get sent home, and especially with them starting this series without Kristaps Porzingis.
Porzingis could be back in the series. They've been doing fine without him. They advanced from their last series in 5 games, but having him back would certainly, I think, cement their chances to win the NBA championship. One thing about these finals, Western and Eastern Conference finals, if you haven't been paying much attention to the playoffs and maybe you're about to settle in to watch now, it's youth. Youth is being served. No LeBron, who's turning 40 in December. No Steph Curry, who's 36. No Kevin Durant, 36. No Jimmy Butler, 35. Those guys are gone. And here's a number for you. Of the 21 regular starters used in the playoffs by the 4 teams left, so in other words, the top 7 in the rotation of each of the teams, or no, less than that. So the top 6, basically, in the rotation of the teams, only 6 have turned 30. Boston has 37-year-old Al Horford and 33-year-old Jrue Holiday. The Mavericks have 32-year-old Kyrie Irving. The Timberwolves have 36-year-old Mike Conley and 31-year-old Rudy Gobert. The Pacers have 30-year-old Pascal Siakam. So that's it for the old-timers, and the rest of it is young guys. And nobody has been getting more attention in these playoffs than Anthony Edwards, who, it seems like blasphemy, has been compared to Michael Jordan. I think it's way too early for that, but, based on the way he has carried his team and this team coming out of – they didn't come out of nowhere because they were the number 1 defensive team in the league this year, but you don't pay a lot of attention to Minnesota. So, this is a series where he can truly cement himself as a star if he can get his team to the finals. Can he do that? This is a preview of the Western Finals with the TNT crew. It's Ernie Johnson, Vince Carter in for Shaq, Kenny Smith, and Charles Barkley on that series, which gets underway tomorrow night in Minnesota.
Based on what you've seen so far, Vince, based on where you've seen this Minnesota team, but a Dallas team that knocked out the Clippers and then knocked out the number 1 seed OKC. Well, what is your gut telling you about this?
I like Minnesota's defense, and I think they can handle the offense of Dallas. But the question is, can Minnesota, Gobert, Reed, and Cat, can they keep these young guys off the glass? Gafford is extremely active on the glass. Lively is extremely active on the glass. And what it creates is extra opportunities for open threes. You don't want to get Luka going, particularly open three. P.J. Washington, because my question was, who will be the third scorer for Dallas? And P.J. Washington has stepped into that.
He's answered
to that role, and they're active defensively. So it'll be an interesting series, and I think this can go 6 games, if not 7 as well.
Yeah, you don't get away that easy. That wasn't an answer.
What?
You just said.
Ask my thoughts.
Yeah, but are they supposed to pick somebody?
Yeah.
That's all
I
right.
said, what's your gut telling you about this series? Kind of as a way of saying, who do you like?
Oh, who do I like? I like Minnesota.
Me or Kendall? You. I think this is going to be a fabulous series.
Oh, no, we ain't.
No.
Fabulous. It's going to be fabulous.
Get them.
Who do you like? I like the Wolves. Okay.
You didn't howl.
That's not unusual.
No, we don't need that.
I think.
Get them.
Man, that's tough. Man, hey, we don't come around here to answer tough questions.
Man,
Hey, you know what?
Say it will be the Minnesota Timberwolves. Would be the favorite. I don't know, but I might change
Would
my
be
mind.
the favorite, but you
I got to
change
think
your
about
mind.
it a little more. Though.
I agree.
You know,
I
if
gotta
it was
think about
March
it.
Madness, you could wait to Game 4 and pick.
Yeah, exactly. I gotta wait. I gotta wait.
I've been really high on Dallas through these playoffs, and I liked them over OKC.
Yes.
You and I both did.
Yes, I did.
They find a way, but there's some kind of vibe surrounding the Timberwolves this
Something
year.
going
I mean,
on.
when you
I think-
have that kind of year, your coach gets a knee injury and he's addressing his troops on crutches, and you come back and you win this series, coming back the way they did in Denver. I just have a feeling Minnesota's going to the NBA Finals.
Well, listen. I said earlier, man. Tonight was a total team effort. I think you can make a conscious pick on either one of them, but man, tonight was really impressive. To be down 20, to come back, but to get all those contributions from all those different guys when their best player didn't even play well. That was probably the most impressive thing. Like if Ant had to play well, and then those other guys played well, I said, Anthony didn't have a good game, but those other guys was, man.
Yep.
So I'm going with the Wolves.
All right, well, that seems to be the popular pick. I think that it would be a very good series. The NBA, from a rating standpoint, I think would like to see the Celtics and the Mavericks play just from a star standpoint in that, although Edwards has picked up a lot of momentum. But you got Kyrie Irving, who's been there before, part of the LeBron crew that won a championship in Cleveland. And then you have Luka Doncic, who has not played in the finals yet, and I think a lot of people would like to see him play. And Boston looks like the best team and the team with the most pressure on him. One of the underplayed stories about the playoffs so far, and I'm surprised there hasn't been more talk about this, the odd situation going on with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Glenn Taylor has owned the team. He's 82 years old. And he made a deal to sell to Alex Rodriguez and his partner, Mark Lure. And everything seemed to be going along fine in that direction. Nobody was really paying that much attention because it was the Minnesota Timberwolves. Well, now they're in the Western Conference Finals. People are starting to pay attention. But on top of that, there's a story that's brewing behind the scenes, which I'm not sure how it's going to wind up. A-Rod and his partner were supposed to make a $600 million final payment back in March, I believe. And it came after the deadline. They didn't make it in time, and so Taylor said, forget it, I'm going to take the team back. It has gone to arbitration, and this is going to be figured out as to, who still owns the team. Does Taylor have the right to take it back? Or do A-Rod and his partner have the ability, even though the payment would be late, to still have control of the team? Now, A-Rod was down there, and he was dapping it up with everybody on the court after the Game 7 win. He's celebrating like he's the owner of the team. Is he really the owner of the team? I think that's in question right now. He's not giving up his courtside seats, and you're going to see, I think, a lot of him as these Western Finals go on. But that's a very uncomfortable situation, and we'll see, how it all is settled. I think it probably would be after the NBA Finals when they get it all worked out with the arbitrator. And the other connection that is kind of interesting with A-Rod and the Minnesota Timberwolves, you may not remember this, but when A-Rod signed that contract with the Texas Rangers, would have been, I believe, 2003, so it was over 20 years ago. He had played out his initial deal with Seattle. You have team control for like 7 years. and he hits the free agent market. And it's assumed that he's going to sign with the Yankees or the Red Sox. But somehow, Scott Boras, his agent, and I forget the name of I think it was Tom Hicks was his name. Tom Hicks was the owner of the Texas Rangers. He convinced Tom Hicks to pay Alex Rodriguez $252 million, which was like $100 million more than the Yankees and or the Red Sox were offering. And he convinced Hicks that if he had this superstar player, that the team was going to be put on the map. Well, the problem was, with the amount of money he paid him, he couldn't pay anybody else. And the Rangers were terrible. A-Rod was good. The Rangers were terrible. And eventually he had to deal him to the Yankees, and Boras squeezed even more money out of the deal. But the number 252 is significant in this way. Kevin Garnett had signed a deal with the Minnesota Timberwolves, which really, kind of set in motion how they were able to cap salaries after that. Like the NBA said, "Oh, this is getting ridiculous. We can't have players paid this kind of money." So he had signed a deal for $126 million with the Minnesota Timberwolves when he became a free agent, and Boras wanted to double that. So he didn't ask for $250 for A-Rod. He asked for $252. That was an ego thing. We got twice as much as the highest previous contract in sports. And so that's how he got A-Rod $252. So in many ways, A-Rod can thank Kevin Garnett for the amount of money he got. And now things are kind of in turmoil here with his ownership of the Minnesota Timberwolves. So we'll find out, I guess, more as this series goes along where this is in the arbitration. Maybe it's on hold for a while, but he's not gonna shy away from acting like he's the owner of the team, because that wouldn't be A-Rod's style. So he's going to be down there dapping it up with everybody as the series goes on. Coming up, we'll shift to a little football as RG3 on his podcast has popped his head out and said some things about Jayden Daniels and the organization, which I think are worth exploring. Also, Tom Pelissero covers the NFL for the NFL Network on the curious situation involving the ownership of the Raiders and Tom Brady. Brady has a piece of the team, but it's not yet approved, and what's holding it up? We'll get to that with what Pelissero says and more. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Next hour, Greg Cosell, who probably watches more game tape than anybody. He's the one that started that great Edge matchup show on ESPN 35 years ago, something like that, and has kind of morphed into the guru of tape. So he spends hours and hours and hours watching game tape and breaking down how players play. And he's got an extensive look at Jayden Daniels. Talked to John Keim on his podcast about it the other day, and we'll play some of that coming up in the 10 o'clock hour. Also more yak about the Eastern and Western finals. The East getting started tonight with Boston at home against Indiana, and tomorrow Dallas playing at Minnesota, and we'll take a look at just how we could possibly have a Cinderella matchup between Indiana and Minnesota. I mean, not that at this point in the game it's Cinderella, but going into the season, if you said the finals will be Indiana and Minnesota, somebody would have said you're out of your mind. What? No LeBron, no Steph, no. Really? That's the way it's. Yeah, that's the way it's. It could head that way, but Minnesota would be favored against Dallas, and Indiana, huge underdog against Boston, starting tonight. Caitlin Clark with a little bit of a smudge on her reputation. I don't know if you can call it that, but her team hasn't won yet. They lost again last night at home to the Connecticut Sun, 88-84. She played okay. She had 17 points, left with an ankle injury, came back, but her team was winless, and she picked up her first technical foul. We're not in Iowa anymore, Caitlin, and she was angry at the referee because she didn't get a call on the other end of the court, and she's playing defense, curses at the referee, and got the technical. And Rebecca Lobo, who's doing the game on ESPN, quickly agreed with the call, said that was the right call. So now they've got a 3-game road trip starting tomorrow night in Seattle, and Caitlin Clark still looking for her first win. By the way, when you talk about somebody who you and another person know, not necessarily best friends with, but you're discussing a coworker and they're polarizing opinions. You may say one thing about this person, the other person may say something completely different. So we kind of have that with this surprised me. Bill Spooner, who's a former NBA referee, was talking. I guess this was a podcast or some, everybody's talking all the time on these podcasts, so these come up. But he was talking about Chris Paul, who's people know has had a feud with Scott Foster. But Spooner, this was The Athletic. Spooner talking to The Athletic. He says, I'm going to tell you, and I know you're recording me, but I get asked this all the time. Who are some of the tough guys, some of the bad guys? And when I tell them it's Chris Paul, in my 32 years in the league, he was one of the biggest a-holes. They say, not Rasheed Wallace or meaning, anybody else. No, nothing like Paul. And they're like, oh, he seems like such a nice guy. And I say, yeah, he's a great image cultivator. And I think there are people like that, image cultivators. I'll get to one of them in just a moment. One of the latest incidents between Paul and Foster, not Spooner, but Scott Foster, came in November. Late in the second quarter, the Warriors lost to the Suns. Foster ejected Paul after pair of technicals. It's personal. The league knows. Everybody knows. There's been a meeting, Paul said after the game. I'm okay with the ref talking. I just don't use a tech to get your point across. Then Draymond Green came to the defense of Scott Foster. He said, one of my favorite officials, which I guess is odd for most people. He said, I love Scott, by the way. So these are teammates. Now, Paul and Green and Draymond, they didn't get along for a while. Now they're teammates. I guess they're trying to get along. I think Chris Paul's probably finished. But, it's sometimes you ask about a certain individual, oh, he's a great guy, and others say, no, he's actually an a-hole. And I think there are polarizing opinions about Robert Griffin III to this day. I've made my disdain for what he says and his revisionist history well known. I mean, he was a great, great player here in 2012, but he's been delusional ever since. And what happened to him was in large part his fault. And don't make it seem, because this is an image that he's trying to promote here, that the team used him up and threw him away. As you may know, Griffin, he got hurt late in the 2012 season. He was having this spectacular year, and it was a collision with Haloti Ngata. He was never good at sliding, getting down. He was trying to make a play in the open field, and his knee hyperextended. And he wasn't coming out of the game because he didn't want Kirk Cousins to win that game, which Cousins ultimately did in overtime. But he dragged his leg back on the field, got back, finally couldn't play anymore. Cousins played the following week against Cleveland. RG3 and his dad decided that Mike Shanahan was trying to undermine him, trying to get him hurt so he could play Cousins. And he came back from what I was told a 4-week injury in 1 week. He had to reclaim his position, dragged his leg around in a win over Philadelphia and a win over Dallas to take the division, though Alfred Morris was the real star. He had 200 yards in that clinching game against Dallas. And then, of course, the knee blew out in the playoff game against Seattle, and he was all in for week one. Mike Shanahan wanted to play it safe, bring him back. And as RG3 now has said, he should have sat out the year and allowed his ACL to heal. But he wasn't going to do that. He was too insecure about his job, so he made a promotional video with Gatorade saying all in for week one, had to play, had to be back on the field. And by that time, he decided he wasn't going to do things the way Shanahan wanted him to do it. He was going to be Aaron Rodgers, even though he didn't know how to play like Aaron Rodgers. And that ultimately led to the spiral in his career, which is apparently over now, though he insists it's not. He thinks he has 7 or 8 more years to play, and teams are calling him all the time, but, quote, it has to be the right situation. Whatever. But he does a podcast. He's on Twitter constantly. And in his podcast the other day, he was giving the nod to the organization that he played for, that I think he still wants to be nuzzled by, still wants to be cuddled by it, and talked about how they're handling Jayden Daniels with the underlying current of what he says here is, I don't want what happened to me to happen to Jayden Daniels. Well, a lot of it, Robert, was your making. But here's his analysis of how he sees things going in a positive direction in the way that Jayden Daniels is being developed.
So I'm hoping that for Jayden, the organization, although they're not responsible for the crimes of the past organization, neither are the fans. But I hope the fans give this organization a chance to take care of Jayden in the right way so that he is not used or overused in certain areas of his game just because he's dynamic there. Jayden is a dynamic runner, but he's an even more dynamic passer. And I think this organization is ready to do that. Josh Harris leading the way as the owner. You got Adam Peters there at GM and Dan Quinn as the head coach. And they've already started the process of making sure that Jayden is put in a better situation. They already brought over his virtual reality training system from when he was at LSU. What did that do for him? It allowed him to play ahead of the defense because it'll flash the defense up in the room so where he can identify what pressure is coming. Hey, what tendencies does the defense have? What blitz packages do they normally bring? Are they a saw dog team? Are they a will-free safety team? And he was able to break those things down faster in college, and it allowed him to play faster, which is why I thought he was one of the better processors coming out of this year's draft class. They've also done a nice job of changing everything about the organization, from the way they approach practice, from the way they approach workouts, the team building things that they're doing, not just trying to grow guys the size of their biceps, their triceps, their quads, and their hamstrings, but also grow the connectivity between their brains. I've watched it on social media when I saw the coaches before practice getting the entire team hyped up as they're going through their warm-up drills. And I saw it through the workouts with their strength coach, Chad, who has them doing the barrel holes and things you see military units use to build team bonding, unity, and relationship. So this organization is handling everything the right way. They've taken their quarterback. Yes, they had the whole thing with bringing in all the QBs and all the players at one time, but I feel like they truly believe in who Jayden Daniels is, the person, and that's going to make them take care of who Jayden Daniels is, the player, that much better.
Yeah, there were crimes of the past, but the indication that there were crimes against you, I think, is a little far-fetched. What happened to Robert Griffin III in Washington is in large part due to Robert Griffin III. Now, to his point about the way that they are handling the practices, and Dan Quinn talked about this last week, it's a little bit unusual because you want your number one guy to take all the reps. But what they're doing is they're doing 2 spot practices with the first and second teams running plays simultaneously. So they're each on different fields, and that way you're making the most of your practice time. This is from Albert Breer's column in SI.com yesterday, and they're mixing back and forth. So you got Jayden Daniels working with the ones some of the time. Marcus Mariota works with the ones some of the time. And, I applaud them. Caleb Williams was named starter the first day of rookie OTAs or rookie minicamp for the Chicago Bears. Like, let's not have any doubt here. We got to make him the starter. They're not saying right now, and I think that's a good thing. And the things that Daniels has said, it sounds like he's okay with that, and I think that's a smart thing. Now, Quinn did say, Dan Quinn did say this to Albert Breer. Obviously, you take a kid number 2, he's going to wind up your starter, whether it's now or later. So he said, while the quarterbacks are competing, an offense is being constructed by Cliff Kingsbury for Daniel's skill set, which is one reason the March signing of the mobile Mariota was an early tell. The Commanders were leaning heavily towards taking the Heisman Trophy winner. And then, I think one of the downfalls of Robert Griffin III was he spent too much time in the weight room and not enough time in the film room. I think that was an issue there. He won't admit that, but I think that was a problem. And when he, started having all those issues when Jay Gruden was here, and Gruden finally had enough and said, this guy doesn't even know how to take a simple, 7-step drop and just, ripped him for not knowing how to run the plays. Well, that may not be a problem. It could be. I mean, there are growing pains for every quarterback. Peyton Manning had growing pains. That happens. But one of the things that they really like, and this is again from Breer's column, he says, on the day after the draft, the Commanders brought him in for the press conference. Daniels, he came in, met with the coaches, met with the press, most importantly, got his first NFL playbook to take home with him. The next day after Daniels and his family were ushered home, Quinn heard a story that stuck with him. The plane ride back home, where everybody else was sleeping, he was going through the hand signals of the offense, of how he's going to communicate. So he just got drafted the night before, came here, did a press conference, did meetings on the ride home as opposed to just sleeping. He's giving commands, doing hand signals, going through the offense. He wasn't wasting a second. If nothing else, there's an urgency and a work ethic that I thought was really going to be strong, and that was confirmed in minicamp. Quinn said he loves football. That comes across, so I'm okay. Dan, what does that mean? I said, this is Breer says to Dan, what does that mean? He says, I'm talking about wanting to just put in the extra time. You can tell how important it is to get it right and go for it. So I learned how much he loves it. Like, it's evident by how hard somebody's going for it. I knew he was an excellent competitor. Everybody said that. But to see him take his work and communicate and already to establish some leadership in the way he carries himself and works, it's cool to see. So I agree with Robert Griffin III. The team is handling him properly. All signs are positive at this point. But I'm not going to buy you playing the victim. I'll never buy that. When the story is written of Robert Griffin III in Washington, a lot of the downfall falls on the shoulders of Robert Griffin III. Another subject, Tom Pelissero covers the NFL for the NFL Network. He was on Rich Eisen's show yesterday. Susie Schuster, his wife, Eisen's wife, filling in. And, this has been in the wind for a while. Tom Brady having some ownership of the Las Vegas Raiders. Where are we in that? This is Pelissero on where things stand right now.
That has been something that I think every meeting, Susie, for about the past 14 months, we've all heard, okay, this is potentially going to be the meeting. The simple answer is I don't know. As far as I am aware, based on what I've seen, I don't believe that there is a active voting item on Tom Brady becoming a Raiders owner. But there's also these, one per club sessions where it's just the lead owner who's involved. Those are private. There is no agenda that is sent to anybody else. And based on the complexities with Tom Brady and the Raiders in terms of what's the fair sale price for a percentage of the team, which affects the valuation, which affects everybody else's valuations. There's also the working for Fox. It's a broadcast partner. Is he going to be in production meetings with with Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers when he's a part owner of the Raiders? There's different layers to it. So it's entirely possible this is something that is addressed in the one per club session. Will we actually get a resolution? I can't even place a bet on that, not just because I'm prohibited from placing bets on these things, but also because we've heard it every meeting for so long and it hasn't gotten done yet, just because it is really complicated.
And then when he comes back in like week 7 and he gets stressed and takes the field, how will that affect his ownership, right?
But he's not allowed to. That's the other thing. You're not allowed to have any employee, including players, own equity in teams. So yeah, all of a sudden there's injuries in Las Vegas and he wants to play, or there's some other team that tries to talk him into it. Like there's so much going on here that the owners have been trying to wrap their heads around it. I would say there are some teams, and I've talked to them, that are vehemently opposed to Tom Brady being an equity partner, being a part owner of a team, and broadcasting games. They simply don't want to have it. They're not going to let him into production meetings. They don't want somebody on talking about their team who's an owner of another team. There are some teams that have taken a real hard line saying we are not going to vote for this no matter what. So you're trying to figure out, is there a way that you can navigate this thing forward and make everybody, at least 24 of the owners, happy?
But like owner of the team, he's going to own like 0.5%.
But it is a crazy conflict of interest, though, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of it is an insane conflict of interest.
I would
no
say
matter what
probably
the
not,
is.
though. I mean, he's a guy, like, he has no say on anything that relates to day-to-day about the Raiders.
Oh, my God, that's crazy. He's Tom Brady. He just has to call up and say, oh, hey, it's Tom Brady. Right, I know everything. So here's what I want to tell you about. I don't think he would. I think he has high morals. And I know, okay, I just opened myself up for everybody who hates the Patriots to say, like, what are you talking about when it comes to decisions?
But you really think Tom Brady, who owns 0.5% or whatever it is, Tom, it's super low, I imagine, he's going to hear something at a production meeting and call Mark Davis or Antonio Pierce and be like, hey, here's what I just heard?
I would think not, just because I think that would be a pretty quick way to get yourself banned from everything.
Right.
It's more so just the appearances that you have people who own parts of teams being employed by broadcast networks and talking about the other teams. I mean, think about this, like just the tampering element of it alone. So Tom Brady's on the broadcast talking about some pending free agent going, boy, Dak Prescott, if I were an owner, I'd love to have him on my team. And then lo and behold, Dak signs with the Raiders in March. Again, this stuff all happens. We know it happens. It just doesn't normally happen right in front of your face. that's something that some teams are going to have to be convinced of, that you don't have a slippery slope here in terms of people who are involved with broadcasts owning teams.
That's Tom Pelissero, NFL Network, on the Brady circumstance of ownership. That loophole was closed fairly recently where you can own and play. And it had been open since the league opened in 1920 when George Halas played for the Chicago Bears. And after he finished playing, he kept coaching for another 30, 40 years, whatever it was. And I think you can coach and own a team. Nobody's had the chutzpah to try it, though Jerry Jones seemingly has been on the verge of doing that a few times. But the playing and owning, they stopped that. The NBA had it for a long time. But Magic Johnson, he was part owner of the Lakers when he made a comeback in the 90s. You remember that he had to retire in 91 because of HIV, and then that got under control. He played in the Olympics, and then he made a comeback. He was actually quite heavier. He was playing power forward. Didn't really work out, but this was like 96 or so. He had to sell his shares to come back. I assume that Brady could be approved as owner of the Raiders, his half of 1% or whatever he owns. And then he decides, I'd like to play. There's an injury, and he sells his shares. He could do that. I think he could. But I think that they want to make sure that everything is buttoned up on that. And I think that's a fair point about being in meetings with head coaches of division opponents of the Raiders and his work as a broadcaster for Fox. I can't believe he's still going through with this. But that could be something, that he could find out things that other ownership groups wouldn't be privy to. There's kind of off-the-record things that happen there. Not that he couldn't do that on his own. Not that he couldn't call, Jim Harbaugh whenever he wanted to, because he's Tom Brady. He can do that. Speaking, by the way, of the broadcasting, Greg Olson was talking to USA Today the other day, if you missed this, and he says for, what he's going to have to go through, and this is, pretty demeaning for a guy who got a lot of credit for how good he was as an analyst and did the Super Bowl last year. He's being dropped to number 2, so Brady can step in with Fox. He's with the number 2 team. He says, as of now, so maybe they're negotiating with the other networks to see if they can make him a number 1, but I can't imagine that that's going to happen. I think he's going to have to at least sit this out or stay at number 2 for a year. But he said this, and I say this about my business too. I mean, I'm not patting myself on the back here, but a lot of people look at just being able to babble for a while and think, oh, that's not hard. Just sit behind a microphone and start talking. Well, try doing it for a while and see how easy it is for you to do it. Not that I'm the greatest doing it, but they're still paying me to do it. And I hear from people all the time, oh, my husband, my boyfriend, they know a lot about sports. They'd like to do a radio show. Okay, well, try it. And this is what Greg Olson said about his situation. He says, every guy has their own journey into sports broadcasting. I think everyone thinks it's easy. I think everyone thinks getting up there and calling a live football game for 3 hours off the cuff and being able to get in, get out, and deal with the flow of the game, the players, the schemes, the terminology. There's a lot going on during a game, and I think some guys really transition to it well and kind of take to it pretty quickly, and other guys haven't. And I think we've seen a mixed bag of results over the last couple of years. He actually said that Brady called him and picked his brain on this. And he said, I was happy to share some information with him. Obviously, his playing career and his resume and whatnot is an all-timer. So, we'll see how the year goes. But I think there's a real correlation between being a great player or an average player and how it correlates to being a great broadcaster or an average broadcaster. I think we've seen examples on both ends of that spectrum. Everyone thinks it's easy until you do it. And I think he's 100% right on that. Coming up, looks like Dan Snyder stepped in it again. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Mike Callow sitting in for Tony today at 11 o'clock. Also in the next hour, what was seen on film by Greg Cosell of Jayden Daniels, as he is the hope for the future of the Washington Commanders. And we'll get to what he said to John Keim coming up about 10:20. Last night at the Cannes Film Festival, set to air was a new movie called The Apprentice, and it's about Donald Trump. It has nothing to do, though, with his television show. It's a profile of Trump with Sebastian Stan starring as the young Donald Trump. And it covers his early years as he was mentored by political fixer Roy Cohn, who's played by Jeremy Strong, and his marriage to his first wife, Ivana, played by Maria Bakalova, who I'm not familiar with, but that is the movie that was set to premiere at Cannes last night. One of the investors in the film is Dan Snyder. Dan Snyder, who reportedly donated over $1 million to Trump's campaign in 2016 and another $100,000 in 2020. And he invested in this film with his own company called Kinematics. I guess maybe this stems from when he had a relationship with Tom Cruise. I don't know what that is. I guess he's always been interested in the film business. And he invested in this film, The Apprentice. The problem is, and this is, oh God, did we see the impetuous nature of Dan Snyder over the years, not reading the fine print or even reading anything, just jumping right in like, I got to have Albert Hainsworth. I'm going to give him $100 million. I don't care what people say about him. I don't care that he stepped on the head of a Cowboys center and was suspended for games. I don't care how selfish he is. I don't care that he's going to get fat when he gets there. I don't care. I got to have him. So Snyder invested in this film thinking that it was going to be very positive for someone who he supported as president of the United States. In February, Snyder saw a cut of the film and, according to Variety, was said to be furious. His lawyers have been fighting to prevent this film from getting out. Now, I assume it aired last night at the Cannes Film Festival, but sources familiar with the back and forth say Snyder took issue with the multiple aspects of the film and weighed in on what should be changed. In earlier versions of the screenplay, The Apprentice featured a scene where Trump rapes Ivana. One insider familiar with the scene that is in the current cut described it as violent and uncomfortable and follows a fight between the couple. In 1989, in the divorce deposition, Ivana accused Trump of raping her, but Ivana, who died in 2022, later refuted those claims in 2015. So this film is set to be released. I don't think the lawyers, and I assume Trump's lawyers, have tried to prevent this as well. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to do it. Now, they had one investor who dropped out after January 6th of 2021, but I guess Snyder just stayed in thinking it was going to be shedding Trump in a very positive light. It says in the story, it's unclear if Snyder, who is a fixture at the festival where he socializes with other billionaires on his yacht, he's got the personality of a head of lettuce. I wonder how many billionaires want to socialize with him. But okay, maybe they like to compare yachts or something like that. He was supposed to be there last night. No word if he was, but he does have this film business called Kinematics, and he was an investor, or is an investor, and his lawyers are trying to stop it from getting out. Good luck. God, am I glad we're through with him. Oh my God. Ugh, jeez. How about this? People sometimes ask me, are you the most famous person to graduate from your high school? Not even close. I'm probably not even in the top 25. And I point to others, who have graduated from there, including, and I think he's probably the best known, actor Daniel Stern. He was a year ahead of me at BCC. I remember him when he was there, and there have been embellished stories over the years about him dropping out of school. By his own admission, he was not a great student, but as I recall, he graduated a semester early. And did graduate from high school, and in fact was the graduation speaker when my sister graduated in 1984. So he did graduate from BCC. I guess he didn't go to college, but went on to have great success as an actor. And in fact, I think his first movie was Breaking Away, 1979, only a few years after he graduated from high school. And he also did Diner, and he was maybe best known for his role in Home Alone. He was the narrator on The Wonder Years, and has had a great career both as an actor and a director. But he's got his memoir out now, which I'd like to read. It's called Home Alone, and it references the biggest parts that he had in his days as an actor. And he tells a story of how he almost screwed himself out of a big part of his career. He said that he was set to be paid $300,000 for 6 weeks' work. This was 1990. Now, nobody knew that Home Alone was going to be this monstrous hit. Macaulay Culkin was not very well known. Joe Pesci was known, but, this was not going to necessarily be a blockbuster. Anyway, it was 6 weeks of work. He was going to be paid $300,000. He said, then I got a call saying they had redone the shooting schedule and would now need me for 8 weeks instead of 6. He said they were asking me to add 33% more shooting time, so I asked if he was going to if he could get more money. They didn't want to do that, so they went back and forth on this. His agent told him, just go ahead and take the money. Well, Stern fired the agent and did his own investigating, and he found that Joe Pesci was getting a percentage of the take. He also found out that Macaulay Culkin had cut a deal for $5 million plus 5% of the gross box office. It grossed nearly $500 million worldwide, cost $18 million to make, so this was a huge cash cow. They made sequels to it, of course. And so he went back, and finally they said, okay, we'll double your salary. But then he said, no, I'm not going to do that now, because he's hearing how much money the others are going to get. So he did his own negotiations, and he asked for $1.5 million and 2% of the gross profits. He wound up settling for 1%, which was still a big chunk of change. But the big thing is it led to more movie roles, a lot more movie roles. And, when you think of how, you negotiate deals and you don't – if you know everything that's going to happen down the line, especially with a movie like this, where it's going to be a big hit and it's going to make $500 million, you look at it from that perspective, looking back, and say, well, of course you'll take a percentage. You'll take a small percentage. You'll do away with your salary. You'll ask for 0.5%. No, he at the time he didn't understand, and he didn't know it was going to be this kind of a hit. There's another story like this that I've heard that when the original Madden game came out, and I think it started in the late 80s, something like that. 1989 was the first Madden, and they went to Pat Summerall and John Madden. They were working together at the time with CBS, and they offered them similar deals. And Summerall took his, which was like $700,000. Maybe it was even $70,000. Whatever it was not a lot of money, relatively speaking. Madden, with his agent Sandy Montag, who was really one of the smartest broadcast agents out there, they settled for a percentage, and the money that Madden made off the game dwarfed everything else that he did, including his broadcast salary, which prior to Tony Romo was off the charts. He was probably making $10 million a year when nobody was close to that. But the money he made from Madden, just off the percentage of the sales, was through the roof. And good for Daniel Stern for getting that money. He did BCC High School very proud. And if he wasn't a good student, particularly, I guess, in math, he figured things out and made himself a really good deal. And I guess if shooting had remained on schedule, he would have collected his $300,000. He would have made a lot more in the sequel, obviously. But the fact that the shooting schedule was changed and he was able to make these changes along the way, he made himself a lot more money. All right, Greg Cosell watches a lot of tape. And what he saw on tape from Jayden Daniels, he explains that to John Keim. Next, it's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Oh, the reckoning is coming in college sports. Jesse Doherty in the Post today has a big story that I'm going to sort through this afternoon and give you my take on tomorrow. But essentially, there's going to be a settlement between the NCAA and one of the lawsuits that they're facing for $2.7 billion in damages. And the reason there's going to be a settlement is the number could get much bigger than that if it goes to court. It's called House versus the NCAA. And the NCAA is going to lose. There's no question about it. And And the NIL stuff that we're seeing now is just the tip of the iceberg, and we are going to eventually have players getting paid. They're going to get salaries. They're going to sign contracts, and this nonsense is going to stop, and we're going to have stories like this coming to an end. Georgia quarterback Jayden Rashada is suing Florida head coach Billy Napier and top Gators booster Hugh Hathcott for fraud, among other allegations over a failed $13.8 million NIL deal. Remember when we heard this quarterback was going to Florida with a $13 million deal? You go, wow, this is insane. Well, it really wasn't real, and he wound up transferring. He's now at Georgia. We'll see if he becomes the starting quarterback. But what has been going on for the last few years is not sustainable. They can't do it, and this $2.7 billion settlement is going to pave the way for what we should have had in college sports for many years, and that's the players getting paid actual salaries, maybe a salary cap for each school, however they do it. But this fraudulent way of doing business, this NCAA fought the Supreme Court said no. You can't have these people work for free. So it was Ollie Oxenfree. On came the NIL. Nobody really understood what the NIL was, other than it's just boosters dumping money into what they call a collective and paying the players. I thought we were going to see players doing ads all the time. We've seen some, like Caitlin Clark as a player at Iowa did a ton of commercials. There have been some like that, but the reality is it's just a crazy system where people are getting paid a lot of money, and some are getting screwed, and some are being promised things that don't actually happen, like this quarterback here at Georgia. So it's got to come to an end, and it's coming to a head. All right. Meantime, Commanders go through their off-season workouts. Everything rosy coming out of there about how Jayden Daniels looks and what a fine young man he is and how he's developing, and everything is rolling down the tracks smoothly. How good is he going to be? Well, that's, you can't really predict that necessarily. But as they say, the film don't lie. And Greg Cosell has spent more time watching film tape maybe than anybody else over the last 35 years. He was a producer with NFL Films. He may still be. I'm not sure exactly, how his employment works, but he's the one that developed the Edge matchup show, which really opened the eyes of football fans as to the intricacies of how plays are developed and what you don't see necessarily on TV, but you see on tape or film. And for many years, he had Ron Jaworski doing it, and I think he had various Merrill Hodge was a partner for a while. He may have had others along the way, and eventually Greg became one of the analysts because he watches the tape himself. He was the one that was doing it for other people. He's that good? I'll just do it myself. He has the name of Howard Cosell because he's Howard Cosell's nephew. In fact, looks like him a little bit, and he does a lot of radio. I've known Greg for about 15 years. Knew him when he was actually just getting started with this. Like, hey, people are going to put me on the air to talk about what I do. Yeah, we love this. People. So he's got a bunch of separate deals where he does, analysis of teams, players. He's really good at it, really good at explaining it. And John Keim had him on his podcast the other day and asked him to break down Jayden Daniels, asked him to tell what he had seen in looking at hours and hours of tape of Daniels, and especially how he's developed the big jump that he made from year 1 to year 2 at LSU.
Well, I would almost go back to year 1 at ASU because Jayden Daniels had a really strong freshman season. A lot of people might forget that he was throwing to Brandon Ayuk that year, right. But he's really improved in incremental ways and in significant ways. And I would say that his 2 years at LSU were really, really good. And what I really liked about Jayden Daniels is I don't think, based on tape study, and that's all I can speak about. I've heard he's a great, great kid, too. I don't know Jayden Daniels, but I've heard he's a great, great kid. He's sort of part of that Southern California triumvirate. He's really close with Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. They're all from the same general area. But he's not just a runner. Obviously he's incredibly dynamic, but I think as he's played more, he's a pocket quarterback. He leaves the pocket when it's, for the most part, a last resort. Obviously, there will be times, every quarterback that can make plays with their legs will leave at times when they don't have to. They'll leave prematurely. But for the most part, he lets the system work. I thought one of the things that really stood out this year in his LSU tape was his willingness to work through the progressions and make progression read throws, and particularly make throws in the middle of the field between the numbers, which for a lot of quarterbacks coming from college to the NFL, John, and you know this, is an issue because the hash marks are closer, and sometimes it seems to young quarterbacks like there's 15 defenders on the field when they have to make throws in the middle of the field because it's tighter. In college, you don't necessarily have that issue because the hash marks are wider and the defense has to stretch horizontally to deal with that. And so therefore the middle is often wide open, and sometimes seam balls, it seems like no one's there on defense. But I thought he really, really improved in that regard. He doesn't have a power arm, but he certainly can make all the throws. Every once in a while, a deep ball would kind of lose energy on the back end. That's not the strength of his game. But he threw a great slot fade. He threw a ton of those to Malik Neighbors, threw a great slot fade. And I just thought that there was a calmness and a poise and composure to his game. He played effectively and efficiently from the pocket, and he made the kinds of throws that you see in NFL games. He wasn't one of those guys that built up his numbers, throwing, tunnel screens, which theoretically anybody could throw.
Right. And, when did you look at him as like being a strong possibility for as high a pick as he went?
I would say last summer when I watched his 2022 tape, I said to myself, and I don't have my notes right in front of me at the moment. I'm not going to sit here and read my notes to everybody. But I remember last year after I watched his 2022 tape, thinking that with continued improvement, that this guy is a first round type player. Now, I'm not one of those people that say, make lists. I'm not a list guy, so I don't sit here and say, well, he'll be a top 5 pick, or he'll be this, he'll be that. But I thought that he had first round traits based on what I saw a year ago. He needed to, gain a little weight. He needed to just mature physically, as well. He's still a young kid. But that's what I saw a year ago. And then I really, really liked his tape this year. Obviously, they put up a ton of points. I'm not a believer in the argument, well, he's throwing to good receivers. Well, that's the NFL.
Right.
You're throwing to good receivers. I guess we're going to say Joe Burrow's no good because he's throwing to good receivers. Right. That's a pointless argument to me, And plus, and I learned this, and I was very fortunate in my career. Maybe the one of the best parts of my career was I got to know Bill Walsh. And one of the things he told me early on when I got to know him was, when you evaluate a quarterback, you have to isolate the traits and attributes of the quarterback. That's what you're studying. You're studying the quarterback. I've taken that with me throughout my career. You're studying the quarterback. There are many reasons why a quarterback might put up big numbers, not big numbers, but you are studying the quarterback. So it doesn't matter to me who he's throwing the ball to.
Were you good with Washington picking him at 2?
Yes. And
I know I heard you talk about him before the draft. So I know that all the stuff you said, I've heard you.
Yeah. I think just in terms of sheer, well, let's put it this way. I would say that the toolsiest quarterback in this draft, which is different than saying maybe the best prospect, because you never know what happens when they get to the NFL, how they're coached, what they're asked to do, the team they're on. As you know, John, there's 20 different variables. I thought the toolsiest quarterback in the draft was Drake May. I thought the quarterback that controlled the ball the best was Caleb Williams, but I thought Daniels was really, really good in almost every area. Maybe he's not the best at one, but I thought he was really good in all.
Okay. And so how do you feel like his game will translate to the NFL in a Cliff Kingsbury offense?
I think it'll translate really well. I assume Kingsbury will run his offense. I think that's why you hire Kingsbury. I don't think you hire Kingsbury to say, well, you're going to do it this way, which is not the way you've been doing it. So you're going to change up. I don't think you hire him for that reason. So in an ideal world, I think you're going to get a lot of, 3 wide looks, spread looks, don't forget that spreads out the defense too. That can play into the run game element that Daniels gives you. And I'm talking about the design run game element.
Yeah.
You don't want to overdo that simply because he's, the body type, but still, it's a weapon. He's an explosive athlete, and you do want to take advantage of that. So, but I think, the other thing too that spreading things out does for a quarterback, a particularly young quarterback, is sometimes it helps him understanding what he's seeing because defenses have to declare. And what you're trying to do with quarterbacks, all quarterbacks, but certainly young quarterbacks, is you're trying to give them as much information as possible before the snap of the ball. And you can do that with your use of personnel and your use of formations, your use of motion, a number of factors, but that's what you're trying to do because everything is going to be a little faster for every quarterback coming in the NFL. And if they have to start trying to figure it out as they drop back, then it all happens way too fast.
Right. Do you like the Kingsbury offense?
I think any offense I think can be effective, depending on who's running it. There's many ways to be successful running offense in the league. I think it can be for sure. I guess the one thing I always think about, and I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an expert on it, John. I mean, it's not like I know every detail of the Cliff Kingsbury offense. And maybe if he was sitting here, he'd say, "Oh no, you're wrong." But I think that in this league, at some point, you've got to run the football.
Right.
Now, and I think at some point, you got to line up and say, here we come, we're going to run. Because you can run it many different ways. You can run it at a spread and be really, really effective. But, obviously, as you get closer to the goal line, I'm not talking about inside the 5-yard line, but as the field starts to shrink, the spread stuff, because the vertical part gets taken away. So you don't have the vertical and the horizontal spread. You've only got the horizontal spread. So I think at some point you do have to line up and run the ball with some kind of power run game, whether you want to do it in a zone game or gap scheme, which is man blocking. I think so we'll see. I mean, I think they've got the kind of backs that can do that. So I'm curious. That's one of the things I'm very curious to see with the offense, with the personnel, is how they go about implementing the run game. And it's mid-May. I don't think we know the answer to that.
Right. No, we know what they say.
Right.
We'll see what they do.
And we know what they said last year when Eric Bieniemy came in, that it wasn't necessarily going to be a pass-based offense, that Bieniemy, a former running back with a defensive coach, and Ron Rivera was going to run the football. They did anything but. They were dropping Sam Howell back all the time. He got sacked all the time. They threw more passes than anybody else. So we don't know. But I think that's an important point that Greg Cosell makes at the end there, that they do have to run the football, and they've got a back in Brian Robinson who probably is just scratching the surface. Remember his rookie year, he missed the first 4 games after, God forsake, he got shot. And then last year, which was supposed to be more of a breakout year, Eric Bieniemy got, I guess, off track or whatever, but I don't think they used him effectively. So that's going to be something to watch, how much they do run the ball. Jayden Daniels' ability to run much better than Sam Howell, obviously, is going to be a factor here. But it all comes down to how well do you throw the ball from the pocket, and what Cosell is telling you is what he saw on tape is that he's able to make the throws and to read the defenses and do it effectively. I'm giving you something very simplistic. This is way beyond my pay grade, but I do have a lot of respect for what Cosell says. By the way, he didn't mention this with John, but he was not really high on Drake May. He talked about the tools that he has, but he says May is a long way away from being ready to play, whereas Daniels, having played 5 years of college football, might be more ready to step in. May only really played 2 years at North Carolina after he replaced Sam Howell. So that's an analysis that I respect. That's what Greg Cosell says about Jayden Daniels. Time will tell. All the good things that we're hearing in May, let's see where we are in November. And not even November of this year, but November of 2025, because this is not going to be instantaneous. C.J. Stroud is not the model here. If it works out that way, great. But chances are this is going to be a 2-year, maybe a 3-year development before they really even know anything. And I think having Marcus Mariota here is going to be good, and maybe beyond this year. that's somebody who can play while they get Jayden Daniels ready to play. Now, as Quinn says, you're not going to take a quarterback number 2 and not play him. He's going to have to play at some point and may play even in the opening game this year. But I like the fact that they're not rushing it along, and I like what Greg Cosell says about him. Okay, Mike Callow is sitting in for Tony next. Tony will be back tomorrow. I will see you back here tomorrow as well when we begin the show, as we always do, at 9 a.m.